Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 357. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, drnorge, and I'm joined as always on this episode by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the Whatnot Segulent, and the Duke of You Know. On this episode, we are joined by special guest and longtime friend of the show, Art Lyon. He was the colorist on Phantom Stranger recently, and we will talk about his work on there. We also talk about his work being collected in Absolute Top 10. This is the first of a two-part episode with Art. On this episode, we talk about his comic work, and then on the next episode, he's joining us to talk about the film Man of Steel. So it's a great opportunity to catch up with our longtime friend of the show, and hope you guys really enjoy this episode. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. Sponsoring this episode is, of course, DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, this month they're offering a pre-order on that Villains Month special. What it is it's going to be all 53 of the titles. And if you take a look at them, it comes to $211.47 regularly. It's 50% off. It's $105.73. If you're one of those people that are like, wow, I'm really into this whole event. I want to follow the whole thing, but I want to do it on a budget. You can chop that amount in half by bundling it over at DCBService.com. So please consider doing that. Just remember, they are a digital partner as well. Whether you're shopping at Comixology or Diamond Digital, Ivers Media, make sure that you link your accounts to DCBService.com because you earn 5% of each of those purchases towards your DCB Service order. So go to the show website, RagingBullets.com, click on the links there and check out DCBService.com. Also sponsoring us is InStockTrades.com, where you can pick up Art's work on Absolute Top 10. This is something that I highly recommend as must-read material. It's Alan Moore, Gene Ha, Xander Cannon, Art Lyon. Amazing work. $99.99 regularly, 45% off, only $54.99. This is a 592-page book. It's breathtaking. If you haven't picked this up, do yourself a favor and grab it. I want to thank DCB Service and InStockTrades.com for continuing to support our show. Just what kind of a podcast are we?
Well, Sean, Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into the plotline, story twists, and whatnot of the comics we're going to be discussing on today's show. So, if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
Hawkman!
Joining us once again is longtime friend of the show, Art Lyon, and welcome back to Raging Bullets. It's been a long time.
I won't do it. I refuse.
You know, we have Art tied up. That's how we get him on the show. You've had a very busy year working at DC because it's like you've been like literally on everything.
Sometimes it feels like it.
Because you've done Action Comics, you've done Justice League, you've done Phantom Stranger, and Fables. Am I missing something? I think I've gotten them.
I worked on Action Comics number 3. We did 7 pages on that, and then Action Comics number 9, was it?
Yes.
I'm actually looking at, yes. I did 2 issues of Fables, did Justice League number 7 and number 20. Also did, last year, there was a 7-page piece, I think, in the free comic book day special that DC did. I had 7 pages in that. Phantom Stranger, I did 3 covers and 2 interior issues on that. And The Shade.
Oh, yeah, did number 12 of Shade. Absolutely. You guys closed out The Shade, which is one of my favorite characters, so that's very cool.
Yeah, that was a neat project to work on.
Before we actually, because I want to start by talking about Phantom Stranger, but before we jump into that, as a creator and a colorist, because you do such diverse work in the course of the year, and the stories that you guys dealt with, yes, it's you and Gene who have known each other for such a long time working together on these projects, but really the tone of the stories is drastically different when you're dealing with so many different characters. How do you get your head in the game when you guys are working on, really, yes, it's all DC, but, to go from Fables to Phantom Stranger to Action Comics to Justice League, The Shade, I mean, really diverse work in the course of a year.
It usually takes a long time. This one problem I have is every time I start on a new project, like if I'm going to do, like 1 issue or 3 issues of a title. Every time I start, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing at all, and I have no idea what it should look like or what I want it to look like yet. And so I kind of screw around for about a week trying to figure it out, sometimes 2 weeks. In that week or two, I'll do like the preliminary stages of my coloring, which is, to some degree, is a way to procrastinate, but it's also a way for my brain. You know how if you walk away from a project, your brain's still working on it? Right, you know?
Yeah.
There's a part of your brain. Like, it really, one of the most important things I've learned in the past couple of years is the value of just walking away for a while. Because I've learned that if I spend too much time staring at a page, I'll ruin it, or I'll overthink it, and I still do that sometimes, but not as much as I used to. So it takes a while to get up to speed, and what happens is I'll start finishing like a couple of pages or a few pages, and I'll start going, I know what this should look like now, and it just kind of comes. It's the nature of the subject matter. You know, you read the script, and obviously the script, you know, each script on each project is written by a different person, and so the tone's different. Even the formatting of the script is different, aside from just the content. You know, just how each writer writes a script is different, and that helps you to shift gears because you have to read it differently. And Gene's even when I'm working on a bunch of projects with Gene changes his style somewhat, it seems, from project to project, and sometimes it depends if he doesn't have as much time as he'd like, he'll leave out certain kinds of rendering, and that alters the style some. So it's a few different things, I guess.
Is there pressure when you're working with a close friend like Gene? Is it a different sort of pressure than working with other artists? Because you've worked, over the years that we've known you've worked with a really diverse array of artists. And, Gene's work is just, I mean, you guys have Absolute Top 10, which just came out. And which to me is always, I'm so glad to see an Absolute edition with the work that you guys have done on that project, because that was, Top 10 for me is mind-blowingly cool.
It's really great stuff. The Absolute Top 10, I'm not sure if it actually contains... Well, no, it does have... I'd have to look at the list. Does it have a Badge of Honor, that story in it?
Let me check.
Because I colored that. It doesn't have the 49ers in it, of course, because that would be huge.
It does have the 49ers in it.
It does have the 49ers in it?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. It collects...
That's insane.
It collects Top 10 1 and 2, Top 10 the 49ers, Smacks 1 through 5, the American... Top 10 1.
Oh, okay.
The whole series. But it has the 49ers in it.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, I ordered it. It
was
that. Yeah, it's a huge volume. I actually it's funny. I was looking this summer as far as, because my wife and I are both home because we're both teachers, and we were looking at am I going to get a game system this summer, because I play a lot of games on my computer, and I actually chose to get the Absolute Top 10 instead, only because I love it's one of my favorite of the America's Best Comics line, and the work that you guys did on that. And I'm like, I really want to be able to enjoy this, because I read a lot of my comics digital now, but this one, I really wanted to see that oversized, and you only get that in the Absolute, and there's something special about those volumes, so I ended up making the choice of ordering it. So I was looking through the list, I'm like, ooh, 49ers is in there too, and I'm like, that's a big volume. And then there was a story from America's Best Comics special #1, so that should be that.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, then I've got a bunch of stuff in there. I don't think I realized the 49ers was going to be in that. It seemed unlikely to me just because it's so big, but I guess that makes sense now that... So it doesn't include, issues 1 through 12 of the original series, then? It doesn't have that.
I'm almost positive it does.
It does have... Really? It must be gigantic. How many pages is that monster? I did the wraparound and the cover for that, too.
Well, that's got to be neat to be able to, know that you're, doing the wraparound for the Absolute edition of work that you're involved in.
Yeah, especially since I haven't colored any Top 10 in years now, not since the Badge of Honor story.
592 pages.
Holy
it collects...
mackerel.
It is the full 1 through 12, Smacks 1 through 5, there's a story from the special, and the graphic novel 49ers is completely in the whole thing. And for anybody listening to this, I ordered it from InStockTrades.com, who's one of our show sponsors. It's a $99 book. It's 45% off, $54.99. I mean...
Go buy that. That's a deal, and it's such good stuff. I mean, just it's really kind of like it's sort of like reading Astro City, kind of. It is its own world, and it's a really, really rich world, and it's a world that feels really complete and really well thought out.
And at that price, you're getting 592 pages. It's insane. I mean,
and not just 592 pages, but 592 huge pages.
Those volumes are just really nice. I've got like a full collection of Absolute Editions. I've been trying. I don't have every single one of them, but a lot of my favorite work I grab in that format, and it's just for the artwork. I mean, especially for a story like that where there's so many amazingly cool and unique characters that are so fleshed out and well developed. It's one of those quirky little series that I just immediately fell in love with. And for anybody listening that's looking for something new that is very self-contained, where you don't need to be reading, I know a lot of people complain like, oh, got to read this crossover, that crossover. This is completely everything in one huge volume that you're just going to love and enjoy.
It is the complete experience. If there's one project that I wish I could go back and hold on a second, I have to do something.
Go ahead.
I will take just 3 seconds. I have to open the door and let my cat out, or else it'll explode. Hold on. And Lord knows we don't want an exploding cat.
No, not at all.
Unless you get it on video and you can post it to YouTube, because that would go viral.
Jim, you're gross.
Jim, society's gross. I just,
you just.
I just have my finger on the pulse of society. I know it,
and are prepared to cater to it. So.
Ask Jim if he has any pets.
Jim, do you have pets?
No.
Okay.
I killed my grass, so until I can get it so I can keep grass alive, I'm not going to be responsible for another living creature.
Grass murderer.
Yeah.
And this is why Jim isn't asked to babysit.
If there's one project I would like to go back and sort of redo or tweak or sort of rework, it would be the 49ers. Just because I would love to go back, knowing what I know now, because that's the first thing I worked on. Literally, it was the first thing, and I really didn't know what I was doing. And if I could go back now, I could make it look a lot better, I think.
How did you get associated with that project? I don't think we ever discussed this.
Well, Gene called me one day. A couple years earlier, I went to the San Diego Comic-Con. This was I went with my wife. This was before we had kids. We made it into a vacation, and Gene was there that year, and he took me to the Wildstorm offices. This is back when Wildstorm was still around, and Jim Lee was in charge of Wildstorm. And I met Jim Lee, and I met a bunch of other people at Wildstorm. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I think Gene already had me in mind to maybe be a colorist and work with him, because he knew that I had an art background. I've drawn my whole life, and he knew that I knew how to use Photoshop. And so sometime in 2002, I just got a call from him, and he said, "Hey, do you want to be my colorist?" And I was like, "Yes." I didn't ask any questions. I was like, "Yes, work in comics, yes." And so that's what happened. And he walked me through some how-to stuff, and I had a computer, and I did that whole thing on a 13-inch monitor, man. Wow. Yes, using a mouse, almost all of it using a mouse. And there's no way that I would color anything now using a mouse, because that's crazy talk.
Was it hard with dealing with smaller monitor size, trying to do color work?
Well, I wasn't used to anything else, so no. I mean, in retrospect, I can't. It's certainly that's a lot less real estate, than I'm used to now. I mean, but even now, my monitor is not that big. I've got a 24-inch, which is a good size. I'm completely happy with that. Looking back, a 13 is half that, practically. It's I don't know how I got by, and actually I killed. Literally, the last day I was uploading my last pages on the 49ers, my monitor crapped out. And I had to call my editor, whose name I'm blanking on, Scott Dunbeer. I had to call him and ask if the files had completed uploading, because I couldn't tell.
Wow.
Couldn't see. So literally, the 49ers killed my first monitor.
That's amazing, though, because for your first big work like that, to be working on an Alan Moore book with Gene,
I know.
I mean,
it's ridiculous.
What a home run for a start!
It's kind of ridiculous. It won the Eisner for best original graphic novel. I mean, my name's not on the award and wasn't mentioned, but I'm going to assume that I contributed some. to the success of it, But yeah, I know. I mean, it's, I had known Gene forever, and Gene at that point, again, this was 2002. Gene had been in the business at that point for 10 years. So,
name on it,
that's how that happened.
Name on it or not, you're part of an Eisner Award-winning project. I mean, how cool is that?
It's kind of cool, I have to say. And I mean, halfway through, we stopped and worked on Global Frequency number 12. Which is actually, I think, one of the favorite things I've ever worked on, just because I actually didn't do much not as much in panels. A lot of what I did was compositing images and adding backgrounds and adding all that stuff in the gutters, which is the space between panels. I actually really enjoy that kind of work. So, and coming back, working on Global Frequency, because the 49ers, we were trying to keep things really muted. The colors muted. On Global Frequency, I completely ignored that and just went, lots of color. And I think it really helped because when we came back to the 49ers, or when I came back to the 49ers with the beginning of Part 3, Book 3, which starts with the assault on the brothel, if you remember.
Oh, I do, yeah.
At that point in the story, yeah. When I came back and started working on that, I could really tell that I had learned, I don't know what, but something, because I think it looks, the last half of that book I think looks a lot better there than the first half, and I think it's because of that break, and I went and did something else that was sort of stylistically different, or tonally different, and then came back, which again is what I was talking about earlier about stopping and walking away from something and coming back to it is invaluable.
How would you describe top 10? Because Jim is. We actually had a little challenge between the two of us, and I promised Jim that if he gets, which I know he's going to get, the absolute top 10, that if he didn't like it, I would buy it from him.
Ooh, okay.
Because because I literally, and there's very few times, as he's mentioned, there's very few times that I've actually done this. How would you describe, as somebody who's worked on it, top 10 to a new reader? Like, how would you describe it to somebody?
The way it's usually described is it's Hill Street Blues, except everybody has superpowers.
That's a great description.
The way I would describe it is, okay, it's about a police department, and all of the officers in the police department have superpowers, but everyone else in the city does too. And so it's interesting because as a result, it's like the old joke about how if you highlight everything in a book, it's the same as highlighting nothing at all. It drops everything back down, and it's just about people. And yet, of course, because it's Alan Moore, he does lots of interesting things with the powers that the characters have and how it affects them. And I really love the whole the storyline about the Norse gods.
Absolutely.
There's a storyline about the Norse gods they hang out at like a bar, and it's really interesting, I think. It's really, really interesting. So yeah, that's how I would describe it. It's about, everybody's got superpowers, but it doesn't matter.
Because you look at the subtle coloring styles and then the big, broad, bold coloring styles. The subtle styles, I would say, would probably be a nice challenge to keep it subtle but not, simple. You still want to have dynamic to it, but those colors would be really fun to just, bam, throw it into it. Do you have a preference on which style, or is it based on the character?
I like both. I like the challenges of both. The interesting thing about doing a book which has sort of a muted palette, or something like Fables or The Shade, which we tried to keep things in like a limited kind of palette, is that it gives you a chance to, if you want to make a statement, then you throw in a splash of color, and it really stands out then. And so that's an advantage. But it's also fun to just do a big slam bang, bold, colored, superhero comic. So it's a little more challenging for me to do straightforward superhero stuff, just because like working with Gene so much, and specifically because I started on the 49ers, my early instincts were to go like lots of color, but Gene kept saying no, tone it down. And we worked on that thing for like a year and a half, and so I think I got it ground into me to tone it down. And it's taken me all this time to tone it back up, I think.
Well, just look. I'm looking at the Phantom Stranger right now, and some of the cool stuff I love is how when we get these close-ups of his face, you got the obvious ink work, but then you have some of like the accents on the cheek, accents on the face is 3 or 4 different similar shades just to give that the shadow and give that effect of depth. And I was like, "This is." You can say it's a lesser palette, but it's a really complex system within this quote unquote simpler style, and that's something I was like, "Man, that's really cool, technique and a really cool just look to it that you make simple very complex and in depth."
Thank you. That's very nice to say. That's. I'm glad that you noticed that. That working with a narrow palette, like a narrow range of colors, is just as challenging, or more challenging than working with a wider range. It's. There's this old saying that art thrives on restrictions, and that's something that I really believe. And so when you narrow your palette, it kind of forces you to be more creative, basically. If you have all the colors in the world, you can use them, but you might wind up with a mess, kind of. If you look at a lot of early computer coloring, like in the early 90s or mid 90s, you'll see a lot of overuse of special effects and colors just because they could. Just because you can't do something doesn't mean you should, of course. So
I'm reminded of the first time Madden had his little magic pen that he could write on the screen and show, and he could actually draw out how the play went out. And the very first time he had that thing, by the time he was done explaining the play, you couldn't actually see the field. He had completely covered the screen. And he came back over here, and he was so excited to use this light pen that he covered up all the action.
I remember watching that kind of thing and going, Madden, bring it down a notch. Use the erase button or something.
We're talking about Phantom Stranger 6 and 7, but one of the questions, and I started rightfully so geeking out about top 10, but is it hard to work with a friend? Like, is there, I would not say hard, but I mean, is there a lot of pressure because of the fact that you have this friendship to try and step it up or, be worried that you might make a mistake or something like that when you're working with a friend?
Only because Gene's really, really mean.
I hear you, man. I feel your pain. I know what it's like to work with a friend who's a taskmaster. It's terrible. It's terrible, ain't it?
Me and Jim are like brothers now.
You don't want that.
Just ask my brother Bill. You really don't want that.
No, it's the opposite is true. Gene's like the nicest guy, but he's also very talented and widely talented. He understands art basically, and his work is really good. He has high standards. He expects really good work, and rightfully so. It makes it harder. It's more challenging, and a lot of times I'm kind of stumbling around, and Gene will email me and basically say, "Art, what are you doing?" Or, "I don't know why you did this, but it looks terrible." And I'll go, "Oh, okay." But on the plus side, he will come back and explain what's wrong or why this doesn't work or why he wants something else. And he'll explain it in a way that makes sense, and I'll go, "Oh, well, that makes sense. Okay, I'll go back and I'll change that." I mean, Gene would be really good at teaching art because he's very good at explaining why things work and why you do this and why you don't do that. So it's harder, but easier, and I've learned a lot. It's easier also in the sense because we call and we talk, and even if we call to talk specifically about something that we're working on, we always wind up talking about comics or movies or TV shows or our wives or whatever. So it's really nice to have, and because Gene is somebody who likes being challenged. He likes working on things with other people who are excited about what they're working on. I've asked Gene repeatedly if there was a character, at DC or Marvel or somewhere else that he really wanted to work on, and each time I ask, he has the same answer and says, "No, I just want to work with really good people who are excited about their work." And I think that's a really good way to be,
The respect you guys have for each other shows in your work, because I genuinely, when I see your work, it's another level, and it's stuff that stands out to me. And, it's when we first met you and had the opportunity to start chatting with you years ago, I was so excited because the artwork that you guys produce is just stuff, it's unique. And in one of the things that's great about comics is in film and all artistic mediums is it's the ability of people to work together to tell stories in a different and unique way that just stands out and spurs the imagination on. And your work does this. I'm looking at Phantom Stranger right now, and the situation where he's arguing with the girl in Vegas.
Oh, right.
The emotional journey that she goes on, from being snarky to all of a sudden picking up her phone and just kind of being like, what? It's for you?
She's kind of freaked out and then just runs off screaming.
I mean, it was in just a few panels, every emotion. And I'm a huge fan of this because, you're dealing with something that's very flat and there's no real movement there. But this ability in comics, and I think it's the true talents that can do this, to create something that in your head is on a film reel. I was filling in my head the blanks of everything that was not a panel in that whole sequence because you guys told this story in such a way where I was totally on her journey. I was seeing her moving. I saw her motion. I don't think I saw somebody leave a casino quicker than she did. And and that was one of the greatest things about this whole thing because, the whole thing is about, to give us an idea of what being around the Phantom Stranger would be like. And through her, I think I learned more about him and what it's like to be around him than I think any other character has. I thought that was wicked cool.
Well, you have to have the normal character. If your main character is the weirdo, you have to have a normal character in there that he interacts with.
That was just awesome. That she left her cell phone behind.
Right. I'm out of here. I don't care. I'll get a new phone.
Well, and then she eventually loses that one as well. Which she should just stay away. And you have the line in there. They have the line in there. I'm just going to go to landlines from now on.
What is it like as a creator to work on characters? I know you're a fan of classic characters like Adam Strange, and it's one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to talk a little Phantom Stranger with you, just because it's fun sometimes to talk about these quirky characters that don't always get as much screen time. And Phantom Stranger's certainly one of those strange guys. But now you're dealing with a new 52 version who's basically Judas. As a creator, you've dealt with Phantom Stranger, you've dealt with a new Superman, you've dealt with a new Justice League. While these are the same characters from the past, they're newer versions of them. Is it hard to get yourself in the mode that it's a new version of them? Do you try to find a balance? How do you deal with that?
I don't think I've given that much thought. To be honest. No, I mean, I understand the backgrounds are changed with the Phantom Stranger more than with some other characters. I try to focus on the core sort of mood or feeling I get or that I have already existing in my head of that character. And, of course, obviously, I pull cues from the script. In the case of the Phantom Stranger, I wanted him to be two things. One, scary, and two, mysterious. If you can get him to be mysterious and scary, then you're halfway there, And I tried doing that with a bunch of different ways, either how he's lit or what kinds of colors I'm using on him. In each panel, I tried to make him stand out, even if he's not speaking, even if he's not the focus of the panel. I tried to make him stand out because he should be the weirdo in the room. Even if he's around a table with Lady Luck and three demons, he should be the weirdo.
Yeah.
He's the guy that doesn't belong there.
I love the Beppo Heat Vision corn chips.
Yes.
You got to bring in the super monkey, right?
That's right. Yes, that was Gene's doing, of course. I can't take responsibility. I just colored it.
I like the Phantom Stranger in this because as a kid, I read stories with the Phantom Stranger in it, and I remember having issues where the Phantom Stranger was like the narrator,
right? Yeah,
and stuff like that. I got a lot of comics involving the Phantom Stranger from flea markets and stuff, so it's kind of cool now to be able to read a Phantom Stranger series where this DC Enigma, which is, I love the way you were talking about how you were looking at coloring him because that's what he always should be. And I knew with the New 52, one of the ideas behind it was, yes, we're doing newer versions of these characters, but we want to also make sure we focus on what at the core made the character cool. And I think what you touched on is exactly what makes the Phantom Stranger a cool character. He's got to be an enigma. And he felt like that in all of this.
Oh, good.
We got the new Dr. 13 in here. I really loved the way this all played out because you felt like he was like this geeky kind of kid who got involved into the supernatural. And it actually, the way the story develops, it so leads into the eventual turn that he does on the Phantom Stranger. Because I could see how this kid would wind up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because he's playing with things that he seems to know a lot about, but it's clear that there's also avenues of it where he's bound to wind up horribly surprised by some of the things he dabbles in that he probably shouldn't.
It seems like, too, that my understanding of what they're doing at DC is that they have sort of I keep seeing this in their comics, is that magic has a price. It seems like they're stressing that in a lot of their comics. It's often or usually or always not worth messing with because you're going to have to pay.
Yeah, this is one of the things with where I'm still getting my getting my comfort zone with when we talk about the magic stuff, because I never really was a magic reader or any of that, and especially within the comic universe. So that's something I've enjoyed about this, that there is always, every character has just that darker side when you're dealing with the magic. Even the true hero ones still have to pay the price, and I think that's kind of a neat concept to put into this.
If I can make this comparison, and it might not be fair, but I think that DC handles magic pretty well. At least it's you run into a problem with magic if in a superhero comic book you have a magic-using character. If the magic pretty much just boils down to making force fields and blasting people, then it stops being interesting as magic. It's just, like another superpower. And one of the things I like about this script is that's not what this is about. It's about magic and the weirdness of it and how it works, and it's not about blasting people or making force fields.
I love the room where the high-stakes poker game took place. Like that, I love quirky magic stuff like that, where you're immediately as a reader put into like a visual head game of like, okay, how do you even traverse that? How do you even get from place to place in that room? And I love how that became a part of the story. Like we had to discover for the Phantom Stranger, he feels like this really strong magical character, but he's not omnipotent. He has to think through things, but there's a confidence there too. Like he's got an interesting balance in this story that I just really loved, and I loved how visually that all played out. We got to see him solve the puzzle visually, and I liked that. I thought that was a really cool sequence.
Thanks. Yeah, it took me a while to figure out what I wanted it to look like. If you look at the line drawing, the 2-page spread on pages 6 and 7, as a line drawing, I mean, obviously Gene's done his work and it's constructed really well, and Gene's really good at this kind of thing because he really thinks it through. But still, you've got a bunch of black lines. Like, how do you make that feel like a space? It's like it has depth, which is one of the things I'm always trying to achieve, is a sense of depth, because we're dealing in a 2-dimensional medium, but we live in a 3D world, and like a lot of my early influences in terms of artwork are 3-dimensional stuff. It's sort of Greek and Roman sculpture.
Cool.
So I looked at this 2-page spread and I was like, okay, let's make this work. And I spent way too long on this 2-page spread, but once I had it worked out, I knew what the rest of the sequence.
So then do you use different color tones, Art, to like give us that sense of, because one of the things I really loved, especially in that 2-page spread, was this sense, especially as it stretched out into the background, of vastness. The stuff that's in the foreground was like, it felt very close, but as we saw like the tones kind of mute as they go into the back, you get this real sense of there's what we can't see behind the characters that are on the table and what we can see there as far as in the background, the sense that it stretches out way more than even what we can see there visually, and I loved that part of it because it just felt big.
It's interesting because initially my plan was to make things darker and darker as they got further and further away, just because my initial idea was, if you're in a place like the stereotype of a place like hell is that it's dark and has lots of flames, okay? Mm-hmm. But then I realized that the space would seem larger if things got brighter as they got further away, because it gives a sense that there's a whole area way over there that's lit by something else. Mm-hmm. It creates this like a mental trick, like there's something around that corner that's lighting that, and which means that there's some stuff there, and it helps to create that sense of depth.
Yeah, this was just this 2-page spread was just absolutely wonderful. And one of the things I'm digging is I picked up the digital version of it. I've been buying digital comics when we talk about it on the show because it's easier for me to see. And when this is digitally, it's all both pages right there, boom, side by side, and you can really get a good you get a much better feel for it in viewing of it than I did when I was reading it on the paper side. So this was, I was like, dang, I've been staring at this page for most of our discussion.
There's another thing I was playing with here and that I've been playing with for a couple of years. Actually, I think since Project Superman, but actually a little earlier than that, is that there's kind of an unspoken sort of rule in coloring in that, you want your backgrounds to be cool, like cooler colors, and your foregrounds, the important things on the page, the focus of the panel, you want to be warmer colors. And I like to invert that sometimes and to see where I can push that, because not that it's not true, but I think it's not as true as some people think it is. I've gotten a couple complaints once or twice from editors on a cover because I did something like that. I kind of reversed that. And so that was in response to what you were saying, Sean. You asked about, one of you asked about tones and how I use those to create that sense of depth. And in this 2-page spread, for example, the backgrounds are really, really warm. It's like this orange. It's like a really bright orange, I guess. And the foreground building where the Phantom Stranger's poking his head out of, a la Batman,
yeah,
is actually cooler. It works maybe because I've got like warm light around him, and because he's completely different color. Maybe if it works at all, I don't know. But that's something that I play with when I can.
Jim and I were both fans of the TV shows Buffy and Angel. And it's when he opens up the door, it feels like something in that kind of world, which I really love. I like that you can look at DC. I think for the general reader who looks at DC, you look at like characters like Superman, Green Lantern, Batman, Wonder Woman. And I love and adore those characters. But one of the things I'm really glad that they've been doing with the New 52 is taking a bigger exploration of some of their unique magic and supernatural characters, because they're just different kinds of stories. I mean, when you're looking at stuff like this, I mean, this is not something that would necessarily fit for those kind of characters. I mean, you could do you could do a weird, quirky Justice League story like this, but it's not something you'd see normally. Where you're getting like this. I love the detail you guys did with the the archwork in the background where you see demons' heads. I mean, this is way in the background. Where a lot of times, especially in an establishing shot like that where it's really important to give that sense of depth, to see that so far in the background and be able to look at it. It's one of the things I do love. I do like a hybrid of paper and digital comics now, but this is one that I ended up picking up digitally. And I love having it on my iPad where I'm able to like kind of zoom in onto some of the background details that you like, a la an Absolute. I almost want, it's like they talk about the iPad mini now. Like, I literally, because I read comics on this, I think I would buy iPad window pane. It's like, like, why is Sean carrying like this big bag? Because this is how I read my comics. I need like a window.
Because it's awesome.
Yeah. Every comic's an Absolute edition then. I don't know what it would cost. It would probably cost an insane amount, but I probably would buy that.
Oh, Sean.
I know there's something wrong with me.
Yes, there is.
Do you have a preference on working with some of the larger characters or working with some of the lesser-known characters? Because, I mean, in the time we've known you, you've really worked on an interesting who's who in comics. You've done your Supermans, your Batmans, but then you've also done things like The Shield. You've done, this. I mean, it's really cool work. Do you have a preference on the types of characters, or just do you like the diversity of it?
I like the diversity. I've got a funny story for you. I was at Wizard World, Chicago, maybe 3 years ago, and after the convention, people hang out at the hotel bar sometimes and stuff, and I bumped into Olivier Coipel.
Oh yeah,
who's a really nice guy, and we were talking briefly, and he had recently drawn an issue. This was again a few years ago. He had recently drawn an issue of, this was back when he was drawing Thor, and he had started an issue, like the splash page was a close-up of someone's breakfast plate at the diner, and it was a close-up of like eggs and bacon or something, and he asked me, it was, I didn't color it, but Laura Martin I think was the colorist on that, and he asked me, he said, is it okay that I do that? I mean, I like draw these weird things sometimes just because I think it will give the colorist a break, but I'm worried that I'm asking them to do something that's too too hard or something. And I said, no. No, that's good. That's good. We need breaks. Draw something different, because you can only draw. It's. I like changing things up, and so I love working on different stuff, big stuff, little stuff. The advantage of the smaller characters, the less well-known characters, is that you can put a little bit more of your mark on them and make them your own a little bit more. Whereas if I do coloring on a Justice League, if I don't, if I alter, if I go too far, if I push the red in the Flash's costume too far in one direction or another, I'm going to hear about it, because it's the Flash and he needs to be within a certain range of red, But with a character like the Shield, I decided what the blues were on him and what the reds were and the white, and he wound up with a muted, not real muted, but like a dark red. And that's because I was the only one doing it. So there's advantages both ways, both kinds of things.
That's cool. One of the things that I've noticed in recent years, I don't know if it's just maybe through getting to know people like you who've been kind enough to educate us on, because I'm not an artist, I don't have the art background, especially on color work. I've noticed a lot more the partnerships that I really like between pencilers, inkers, and colorists on work. I tend to notice that there seems to be a storytelling energy, if that makes sense, between those partnerships, where they seem to, there seems to be more communication, or, I notice those projects a little bit more where things just seem to make sense to me. And I think it's just maybe I'm becoming a little bit better at understanding that. But do you find that now, because I know looking back at comics from when I was younger, I didn't notice that as much. Now I'm noticing a lot more style, and books look different because you've got some really cool energy when people come on projects together as a team. Do you notice that being more of a relationship now, or something more that they strive for?
Yeah, it's actually, I was reading something recently. I won't say what, because I don't want to diss anything, but it was one of those comics that was drawn by 3 people and inked by 3 people and then colored by 3 or 4 people, and you could tell because there's an inconsistency of tone and style, and things seem kind of inconsistent. Not because anyone's drawing anything wrong or coloring anything wrong, but you wind up with a situation where you have too many cooks in the kitchen, and it's hard to mesh styles and get a cohesive whole if you have a bunch of people working on something. It seems like at least it happens a lot in comics, because one person's late, or the scheduling changes, and so the person who was going to draw it now can't, and so you have to, at the last minute or later than you would like, an editor has to make a call and get another penciler and get a different inker, and this inker has to catch up on this. And so when you have a team who want to work together and yeah, I guess that answers your question.
One of the things, and I think, Jim, you probably feel the same way I do on this one, I've noticed that, when you have issues where, for a lot of what you're mentioning with scheduling or whatever like that, where it's the same story without a lot of shift in timeline or characters, if you've got different pencilers on the project, I really find that I prefer that you've got the same colorist throughout the whole issue, because that person seems to act as kind of a tone linking thread, if that makes
kind of a glue.
Yeah. It makes me kind of like, when you're getting the style shift and the penciling, it keeps me in the story. It makes me feel like I'm in the same spot. And have you done a lot of work on projects like that where you're shifting between pencilers in the project?
No, I don't think I've had that much, which I'm thankful for. I mean, I love working on different styles of art. I think the past year or two, when I've been working on all this stuff at DC with Gene, I was also working on Strange Attractors over at Archaea, which is drawn by Greg Scott, and also working on some Sam Hill stuff for Archie, also drawn by Greg Scott. And Greg Scott's artwork and Gene Ha's artwork are quite different, and I approach them very differently. And I love it, because each one of them becomes a break from the other style, and it allows me to shift gears, and it uses different parts of my brain a little bit, and I don't get bogged down in the same style, kind of.
That's
yeah.
Do you have to, when you're working on those projects, because I'm assuming you're working on some of that concurrently, how do you get yourself back in the mode of, okay, I'm on this project now instead of that project?
It's not hard. I mean, usually, in the case of Strange Attractors, it's 130 some pages. I didn't color all of them. I colored I think 86 pages or something like that. And I did that over the course of a year. And so what I would do was, I would get done with an issue of whatever, with Gene, I guess, and then do a bunch of Strange Attractors pages, and then go back to an issue with Gene and then do some more Strange Attractors pages. Usually that's how it worked. And so it helps because, I start on a thing, I start on, issue 6 of The Phantom Stranger and get it done. And so I'm starting and stopping and getting like one thing done, and then I go work on the other project, which is more scattered. It worked out well. I didn't have a problem with it. Once I knew what the style was on Strange Attractors, it was no problem. And again, it was a big relief because it meant I could shift gears from what I was working on with Gene and vice versa.
Do you get more time on projects like when you're doing like Strange Attractors, and I know Sam Hill, there have been projects that are, Sam Hill in particular has been one we've been talking about for quite some time. Do you get more time to work on those pages for projects like that because they tend to be a little bit further down the pipeline with release? Or are you on like a similar schedule to when you're doing something for DC, if I'm making sense there?
Well, it seems like the bigger a project is, if it's a graphic novel or like a mini-series that hasn't been scheduled yet, a lot of times the schedule gets moved back just because... I think what happens is that people get kind of lazy because there's no real deadline. They just kind of work on it when they want to and sort of... What was the question? Sorry.
No, do you as a colorist, because I know a lot of times when we've talked with you and with other colorists before, sometimes you'll get pages and you are really on a tight deadline to get those pages done. When you're working on projects like Sam Hill and Strange Attractors, do you have more of a window to be able to maybe hit things the way you want to than you normally would, or is it pretty much the same?
It seems like it, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think of other examples, but with Sam Hill, there was no schedule. I did 3 issues of it like 2 years ago, and then I did the 4th issue just like a few months ago. Just because we got the 3rd issue done, and they changed their plans and said we're gonna put this on hold. And then about 2 years later, I get a script, and it's like, okay, we've got a plan now. We need this done by next month. I'm like, what? Okay. I didn't want to say no because I'd worked on the first 3 issues. I love working with Greg. I like the project. I like working at Archie. So I was like, well, I don't have time, but yes, I'll do it.
Do they have a release on that?
I have not heard. I don't think it's been solicited yet, but I think it's planned for the fall.
Okay,
sometime. So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. That's a project since we've been talking about it for all this time. I've been actively following, and every time I'll go to your website and you list your biography of work on there, and I keep looking for projects that, especially ones that the DC ones. Obviously, I tend to follow all those because of our show, but I'm always interested in your work outside of DC because I want to follow that too, and that's the great thing about creators such as yourself having websites. It lets fans like us have a way to find out what you're working on and where we can see it and those type of things. So I really appreciate that you do stuff like that because it's good for me. And that's when I've been I really want to read this.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm pretty happy with it. Like I said, I always like working with Greg Scott. It's written by Tom DeFalco. And it's pretty straightforward, modern day New York City kind of Mike Hammer kind of private eye stuff, and I think it's fun. With
the Phantom Stranger stories, these last two, the 2 that you guys worked on, the thing that kind of really had me going, wow, that was it was kind of a neat fascination. Was you have the first issue where the main quote unquote action is this demonic poker game. Your second issue, where you have this big, massive alien-type monster that, high action, big, your more traditional comic book, story where you'd have this big, massive monster attacking. And I was like, it kind of really got me how same creative team, 2 dramatic differences, but each one, they still had that draw for me. They still kept you guys really pulled me into the story, and it was such a dramatic difference. Yeah.
Thanks. It's like I say, it's fun to be able to shift gears. That keeps things interesting and keeps creators from going crazy.
Well, and actually, it keeps readers from going crazy as well. Because, I like the dun-da-da comics, but you need to have that subtle touch. You need to have these poker game type issues. And even within them, you still get some great stuff. Because this is a neat story, but I got to tell you, the artwork really did ring it home for me. And this was all of you guys working together on this. Because, it's as time has gone on, I've learned to appreciate color work. I've learned to appreciate inking. I've learned to the various sides of and factions that go into creating the visual look. And with this one, this was again that that limited palette, but still just broad and dynamic in the variations on, especially the simple stuff of the Phantom Stranger's face. Just always is getting me, just because I'm sitting there and it's like, wow, that you see the little coloration there for a cheekbone, but it's like, oh man, that's cool.
I'm just so happy that you noticed those things. So.
Oh yeah. And hey, come on, to be honest with you, you're probably one of the main reasons I notice stuff like that now. Just all the conversations we've had on the show, where it's broadened my palette, broadened my horizons, because I was always the comic book fan of the writing, and when I was a kid, I noticed the artwork and I thought it was neat, but it was never as important to me as the words, as important as the dialogue boxes. Now I have a complete one read through where I don't read any words. I just look at the images and enjoy what the visual treat.
My work here is done. And now the transformation is complete.
This is I'm looking at the details on like some of the tables, especially when you're dealing with small things like coins and things like that. Are those hard to deal with the color work on, or does today's technology with being able to enlarge things? Because I don't know how that looks for you, or is that like you're like nothing more tiny stuff? How does that work for you?
Well, Gene curses me with his lots and lots of tiny things, but no, it's the advantage of working on a computer is you can zoom in and get that stuff. The disadvantage of working on a computer is that you can zoom in and work on that stuff. It is a blessing and a curse.
Do you feel the pressure?
Because you can zoom in and get the details on that little thing just right, even though it probably won't matter. And I've been known to spend way too much time zoomed in too far. It's a tendency I have. I'm kind of a noodly artist, and it takes everything I have to stop myself from doing that and to pull back. If it's an important detail, even if it's small, I will zoom in and try to zoom in and zoom out and zoom in, zoom out, try to figure out how to make it stand out. Sometimes you can make it stand out just with something really simple, but sometimes it needs a little touch, and you need to zoom in and get that highlight in just the right place or something.
I noticed it, though. I mean, I noticed, the time you spent on the poker chips, because that was something, it's a poker game, so you have to pull me into this, watching their poker chips and how the sizes are, and the color work in that, seeing that there were different color poker chips.
Oh, jeez, I had to go through those pages multiple times to make sure that I had it all right, because you don't want, wait, his blue chips were blue in that panel, now they're red.
But I'm so glad you did that, because for me, I just for my brother's 40th birthday, we went to Vegas. So I was just there, and I was rereading these issues to chat with you, and I'm like, wow, dude spent a lot of time on getting that table right, but man, it was appreciated, because it did give me this sense of this is a very high stakes game. So the game that's going on there has to feel like it's real, like it's happening, because we're being pulled into this. This is about his family, and he's playing with some dangerous beings. Even though he's a dangerous being himself, we have to have this feeling like this guy is in a dire situation, which is always interesting to pull off with a Phantom Stranger. And this game felt very real to me throughout it, and that was visually, you guys are pulling me into this story. So I really, thanks for the time you spent on that, because I loved this whole sequence, because by the time this issue hit, I'd already bought into the idea that he's got a family, and I'm into the Phantom Stranger. I'm digging what's going on with him. When we got to this game, I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool, because he's got to really play bait and switch and, manipulate the people around him, while in the same time keeping that Phantom, this is a guy you do not want to play poker with, because he has no facial expression. it was just brilliant
and scary.
Yeah. But the efforts that you put into this was really, because I pointed it out because I noticed it. So thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you for mentioning it and for appreciating it. It does my heart proud.
I think it's made me do more read-throughs on my comics now, because I like going through and seeing the things that maybe are meant to be things that subconsciously we don't notice the first time through, because you guys are trying to deliver like a cinematic experience to us. But then it's fun to go back through after you've had that, and it's like when you watch a film again, you notice like certain lines and details and things like that. But comics are so much like that, especially with this table sequence, because I, as a reader, then went back and spent like way too much time looking at it. And it's cool that, I think it's because you spent that extra time on it that I did.
Well, it's important, when you have these fantastical elements, which of course you have in all superhero comics, is I think it becomes even more important to have the real world things seem real and seem normal, because that contrast makes the weird stuff even weirder, but it also anchors it.
Was finding out that Deadman was in him the whole time, like, I don't know when you discovered it, but like for me that was like one of the coolest moments. You can come out now.
Yeah, come on now, boom.
Well, I like the fact that Deadman, when he pops out, he was a little bit more freaked out big inside Phantom Stranger than inside those demons, and I think that kind of says a lot.
Yeah, I actually really like the script in this. I think that these demons, the way they talk to each other, is hilarious. There's one, I can't remember which character it is, and I don't have. I'm just looking at the colored pages here. I don't have the word balloons, but one of them just says at one point "Shut on up, you moron." It's not like it's not how you expect demons to talk to each other. I just think it's really clever.
I love that they were.
They sounded like brothers.
Right. Yeah.
That was the thing that got me, because granted, me and my two brothers don't look anything like this, but I could see us having a conversation in this style. If we were sitting around the table, and it's weird to say it had felt very realistic, but it did.
Well, these are the kids of Trigon, right?
Yeah.
And I like that. I'm always a fan of when, if there's a choice to take something that's a part of the mythos and bring it to the table, so to speak, like this. It's fun when, like, you get to see them interact and in an environment that normally you'd see them fighting a superhero. In this case, we're seeing them have a different sort of battle that fits these characters, and you don't get to see this kind of thing very often, because it wouldn't be odd to see Superman sit down at a poker table like this, but it's not something you're going to see very often because of the expectations the reader has for a Superman comic.
You would be much more likely to see that in, like, a Silver Age.
Yeah.
I want to take a look at issue 7 because you were kind enough. You posted like a teaser to this cover in our group, which I really it's fun to interact with you outside of doing things like this. You'll come into the Raging Bullets group, and especially with Man of Steel. I like the fact that I know through Gene and your friends and Lowell that you guys are, gamers, you're into like role-playing games and stuff like that. You're into the whole geek culture like we are. And it's fun to have creators like nowadays through social media, one of the positives of it, to interact with us, the fans, in that way. But you did a teaser of this cover. For me, who's been a longtime fan of the work that you guys have done together, to kind of see that like teaser of like the Phantom Stranger, and then it was like, I think it was the same day the full cover was actually revealed on DC's site, and we got to see what was happening to him. But we didn't know the story. Like, how did this happen to the Phantom Stranger? I loved this cover. It's very eye-catching.
I was not real happy with it, but I think I was just overthinking it or something.
What would do you like, as you say you're not happy with it, what as a colorist, because I know you're a perfectionist, and it's something that I think all artists are that way. Like, you'll look at a finished product and go, oh, I wish I had done this, I wish I'd done that. How do you reach a balance where you can say to yourself, you know what, I could spend 3 more hours on this, but it's at the point where it's where I need it to be and I need to move on. How do you hit that point? How do you do that?
I laugh, but I'm crying inside. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I spend 3 extra hours on it because I want it to look right. The thing I've kind of realized recently is the importance of having a plan. Sometimes I just sort of start working on something and just work without a plan, or at least I have a plan in my head, kind of like vaguely, but not enough of one. On this, I wish I could have made things. I could have added more of a sense of depth, and also I'm noticing there's something. But I think I could have given more of a sense of depth on this cover, and I could have messed with the kinds of blues I use on the Phantom Stranger and the kind of blues I use on the Question, and made those more different, and made the background drop back a little more, I think. That kind of thing.
I'm a big fan of J.M.D. Mateus's work. Having Dan DiDio working with J.M.D. Mateus, this story and the 2 issues felt you could definitely tell there was a J.M.D. Mateus tone on the whole thing. Because he's done some of my favorite wacky, weird stories, and it's great. Like, to me, it just feels right to have you and Gene working on a book with him, and I know Dan DiDio too, and everything. It seemed like these 2 issues just had like the kind of story that I really like, where it's kind of like taking you to a place that we know should be in the DC universe, but we don't get to see very often. You know, like seeing him in this church with the breach of faith thing as it opens up, and talking to a priest is just something that it feels like we should be able to see this avenue of DC more than we do, and the right storytelling team was here.
Well, thanks. So that's the advantage of these like lesser known characters, is you can explore that stuff a little more. You can do some of that in like a Justice League or a Superman, but but there's a little more room to breathe in a book like this and do that kind of thing. Just because there's not as much, on Justice League, the pressure's really on. You need, because that's their like flagship book, that and Superman, and the Batman books, they have a little more room to breathe because there's a bunch of Batman books. But yeah, with these somewhat lesser known characters, you've got more room, I think.
I actually loved this church scene, partially because you get a really cool priest in it, and the Catholic faith has taken a lot of lumps on the chin, with all the scandals and all the negative press on it, and I always like seeing a positive portrayal of somebody actually in the cloth. And the way you guys did his face was just again, it was some really great subtleties and comfort, and you look at the guy and you're like, okay, this is somebody I can trust. This is a nice guy. This is a true priest. And just, you get that just from a couple panels, you get that from the openness, and just like his eyes got the really cool splat. There's a nice splash of color in there, and then the softness of the face, and this was again another really cool, just wow, just sit there staring at him for a little while.
Well, that's great. This is a good example of sort of coloring economics here, in the sense that there's only 4 panels where you see this priest's face, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 on this page, yeah. And only one panel. There's only one panel that's really a close up, and that's the panel that I did. Where I did like a full render on his face. The rest of the panels are pretty basic rendering. But when you have the close-up, obviously, a lot of times that's your call to step up and put all of that, the personality and the warmth and the character, into that one close-up. And that way you don't have to do it on the rest of the page.
No, and it worked nicely.
It's kind of like an establishing shot.
Yeah.
It's your establishing shot of the character. You put your work in there, and you can go for a couple pages without necessarily having to put in as much work elsewhere.
What I loved about issue 7 was this. You had in issue 6 this like supernatural poker game going on, but issue 7 became very real world. Like you're in this real church, and then you're going out into the street, and yes, he's talking to his master, who's the dog, but they're having like this deep philosophical religious discussion in the real world, walking down a real street with real rendered, these backgrounds that are gorgeously rendered, where you really felt like this is really taking place. I reference like Buffy and Angel and television shows like that, because I always loved the sense of unique and amazing supernatural characters in real settings. And when you get to see this, I mean, I thought the street sequence with the 2 of them was absolutely breathtaking to me. I really loved, the trees in the background, to the brick wall, to the small fence, that's like on top of it, to buses, to everything that's in the background. It just added this sense of, and obviously I'm referencing these things because they stood out to me as bringing me into a real setting that I felt like I could be walking down and following them going, wow. And I like I like that. And what you guys did there was spectacular.
Well, there are many things you can count on Gene for, and one of them is to draw things that look like real things. And when Gene draws a street scene, he gets reference either taking photographs or just looking up reference online. He'll put your signposts and your crosswalk lights and your fences and your walls and your cracks and your cars, and he'll put it all in there, and it all looks like the real thing. And a lot of times I just take his reference pictures and just sample colors from them and color that way. Especially in these kinds of urban scenes, I think it's essential to get those colors looking like the real kinds of colors you see in a street scene, because there's nothing wrong with I could have just done that background in sort of like one color or just a little monochromatically or just a couple colors, but I also like there's not a lot out of panels really of them walking and talking, or at least not that where you see a lot of background. So I wanted to take advantage of that and get some real colors in there, just as a way to help to set the tone and establish this is just a normal street.
I appreciate on like the details on the grill of the bus, the handles on the car, just everything from windows to paneling to all that stuff. I mean, it just really, to speedometers when you're doing an interior car scene, all those little tiny things that you could cheat on, technically. When art teams don't do that, it's something for me that I know I don't notice it as strongly on my first read-through. I like to go back and look at that stuff because it's stuff like in a film. You don't like notice that stuff in a film when when the background details are put in, but they set a mood and a sense of being there to it. Even license plates in film, when they'll adjust them to the place they're supposed to be. I like that kind of stuff, and you guys are very good at, when I read your material and enjoy it, I really do think of film a lot when it comes to you and Gene and the projects that you're on, because of the fact that between the details he puts in and the color work you do, it's a very motion experience for me. I really do find that more often than I'm realizing, I'm putting things in there that you guys weren't able to draw because of the little tiny things, and I appreciate that.
Thanks. That's great to hear. That Gene puts a lot of work into making things seem real and making things accurate, and that just raises my game. I try to, like I was saying, in the street scene there, try to get colors that look like real building colors, real street colors, real car colors.
Riley's Bar and Restaurant was a great example of that too, because I think that's a very beautiful panel.
The exterior there, or
yeah.
Thanks. That's again. That's pulled from reference that Gene had on some real place.
Now, the big old alien space monster, whatnot. I gotta tell you, I like that. Just that craziness of the, just the look, and then you got a variation. It's not your traditional monster, but it's it has those that feel to it.
Well, there was a basic problem here. Was like, okay, Gene's drawn this crazy looking thing. Number one. So it's already crazy looking, and I'm like, how can I make it crazier looking? Because Gene's done his work. Now, what can I do to enhance it? And I just said, okay, well, what color are the Challengers' costumes? Okay, they're sort of blue. Maybe you could go some purple. Look at dark blue. Phantom Stranger's blue. I've forgotten this guy's name now, the reporter.
Jack Ryder.
Jack Ryder.
Right, yeah. He's got this orange jacket, it's like brown, orange, whatever. And so I thought, what colors are left? I could make him green, but then he looks like the Hulk. Okay, you don't want to do that. I could make him orange, but he's kind of hairy, so then he would start looking like Sasquatch, from Marvel. And so I thought, well, let's go with pink and see what happens. And I adjusted there, so he's got some red and some purple, but there's some pink there too. And that just looked crazy, and I was like, awesome.
I wonder if this is going to turn out to be the origin of the Creeper.
Oh, that's right. I hadn't even thought of that.
Because that's what I kind of thought was going to happen, because if he's dead now, he goes to hell, becomes the demon, and comes back as the Creeper.
Which is different than, I think, the Creeper's origin. But, I mean, like, with what happens to Ryder here, you would think that he would come, I guess, you would think he'd come back as the Creeper. I think that's just, it was kind of cool. Because I liked how this story, you took, like, a Silver Agey concept like the Challengers. I think this sequence proves how Silver Age concepts can easily work modern day. Because that Challengers bit, like, when I saw that page, I'm like, I want to read that book. Like, they had a recent Challengers story that was in that DC Universe Presents book. And seeing them here, I would so read a book like this with these characters all the time. Because I just think that's really cool. And it works today with the modern setting that you see there. You could make that a very interesting and unique book today. It's hard. I think it's hard to get people to try those type of concepts, but I mean, this page, so totally, this is, I would watch this as a film, and I would read this instantly, because I just think it's wacky cool.
There's a really basic thing I learned from reading Alan Moore's stuff, specifically his work on Marvel Man, Miracle Man, and on Supreme, and that is that you can take any, weird, goofy idea or something that most people would dismiss as too old-fashioned or too goofy or too silly, and make it really, really interesting. And that's something I try to keep in mind when reading comics and when working on comics, is that there's no such thing as a bad idea, just as kind of a poorly executed one. And you have to be, the question becomes, are you crafty enough to make it work? Are you good? Alan Moore is good enough, he can take a knockoff of, a British knockoff of Captain Marvel and make it one of the best comic books of the 80s, and take all that weird, goofy Silver Age Superman stuff in Supreme and make it really, really interesting.
And he inspired Neil Gaiman to follow that up, because that Miracle Man stuff is, anybody listening to this that hasn't read that, I know Marvel has the rights to it now. I am so baffled that, like, I don't know what the holdup is, that they haven't released that material yet, because I know they're talking about making news stories and everything, and I want that, but oh my gosh, that material I think is essential reading.
Oh yeah, it's great stuff. I mean, it's sort of half superhero, half horror, really. But yeah, I'm intrigued by that whole Marvel Man thing too. I think it might just be one of those situations where it's just going to require the right creative team, the right writer to come in and figure out how to handle it.
Yeah, and to be able to, I know, to get the right creator that would feel like they've got the kind of home run story that can match up with what was delivered before. Right. And then Supreme, they've just started releasing again the Alan Moore issues on Comixology. They're releasing them gradually.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, so I just noticed it on the app. For anybody, it was released by Image, and I forget who they're being released by now. It's not Image. It's whoever, I don't know who has the rights to it now or how that works, but I noticed it was a different company. But I ended up starting to grab them on the app just because that Supreme run that Alan Moore did was,
it's great stuff. It's really, you can always count on Alan Moore to make everything interesting,
Yeah, it's just one of the cool things. It's funny how, like, when I'm reading stuff like The Phantom Stranger, it does lend me to think of Alan Moore's work. And probably because you guys, like, lead me back to Top 10, and this feels very much in that vein of just being kind of the wacky, when you got talking dogs and monsters, like the Challengers of the Unknown, and Jack Ryder being saved from a car by the Phantom Stranger, only, as we know, and it's one of the things that's been a tenet of this book, he's going to be betrayed. If you see the Phantom Stranger spending way too much time talking to you, you need to run.
Yeah. Is it wrong that I did laugh when Jack went boom? Yeah,
I don't think so.
Okay, good, because I really got a kick out of that, and he's just like, "Okay, Lucky, help! Ah! Boom!" Like, oh, yeah, there goes another coin, and another person dies, and it was a neat part because afterwards, when he's talking to the voice or the master, it's saying, "Hey, I led another man to his death, and I'm 2 steps closer to redemption." He's like, "You led a man to his destiny. this story isn't over yet. So, and we're seeing where these characters are going to go. So we're definitely not done with Jack yet.
You know what I liked? The visual of the monster crashing his hand through the side of the building, because you see that happening from the outside of it, but then we see the close-up of what it looked like from the inside to be there with Jack Ryder. Like, we were behind him. We were, like, basically letting Jack Ryder get crushed, so we didn't.
Right. Rule number 1, making comics, don't crush the reader.
I loved the perspective, though, because everything was so huge there, and you get to really see, like, a first-person perspective view of the monster. But how long did that page take you? Because we're seeing the monster come in, and there's so many little pieces of things flying all over the place. The glass, the camera falling back, debris. In those debris situations where you see that, and you actually had to deal with and I loved that you did this. You got glass in front of Jack's coat, and you actually colored it so we could see that the glass would have a visual effect of the color of the coat, but it's not going to be the exact same color because of the glass. Like, I was looking at that, I'm like, oh my god, dude, like, really went hog wild with this, and and the pants. It's on his pants, too, and even little bits of it on his shoe. I mean, how long did this take you?
A long time. Actually, this page, Gene helped me out on this just because of our deadline. Like, Gene got done drawing and said, what do you need help with? And I said, page 14. Because it's insane. Thanks for drawing it that way. Thanks. So his punishment for drawing it was to have to help me color it. It takes some doing. A lot of it is rendering, but a lot of it is also, this is a really good example of a page that needed a lot of planning and figuring out. There's this thing called flatting, and we've talked about that before. A lot of times I will hire a person to flat the pages for me, and they just put in flat colors, whatever colors they want to. I can give them guidelines or reference, but a lot of times it doesn't matter. But even on a page like this, I get my flats back, and they've isolated every little thing, or sometimes they'll isolate in separate colors the wrong things, or things they'll have flatted in a way that's not useful. And a lot of times I'll have to go back through. In a page like this, where depth is really important, and you've got layers of stuff going on, what I'll do is I'll make another layer of flats that separates things into layers. And then what you wind up doing is that I can select like all of Jack, or all of the camera, or all of a glass, or just the monster's hand, or just the monster's head and shoulder, or just the debris above Jack. And just it involves a lot of adjusting brightness and darkness and saturation and hue until you get something that works. That can take a long time, just sort of adjusting and adjusting this and going back and adjusting that, and then go back to the first thing and trying to make it work.
When you got a character like the Question, how hard is it to deal with a character with no face when you're doing the color work? Because there's one of the things that I loved that you and Gene did here is you take a guy with no face. I'm always amazed. I love the Question, one of my favorite characters. You guys made him have expression. Like, you could tell what his emotions were in those sequences, which is, from when he's calm to when he's really saying, why should he trust you? And you got him pointing, and you can actually see that he is in a commanding presence by the way that his whole facial expression is. Again, a man with no face, with the way that his mask works. How do you deal with that differently? Is it different for you than dealing with a character where you can see more of the face?
It is different. I love the Question too. I love that he has a powder blue suit, kind of, or coat and hat, or at least it's usually done in like a lighter blue, which you can't get by with. You can't get away with that in the real world. You'll just look goofy. But he has no face, so you're distracted by his weird blue costume because of his face. No, with him, I don't think I used any skin tones on his face. Usually on a face in a close-up, there's lots of colors in your skin. There's greens, and there's reds, and there's pinks, and there's some blues in there, and some purples, and then the colors that we usually associate with skin tone, which is kind of a pinkish, orangish kind of thing. On the Question, I don't think I used any of those skin tones. I just gave him like one color and highlights and shadows. And sometimes in the shadows, I would add a color just, because of reflected color. But I think I'm not sure what I did to achieve what you're talking about. If I achieved it.
It was awesome. I just really loved the whole sequence because his face was blank when it needed to be blank, and showed expression when it needed to. And I think it's one of the things, probably as a colorist, you have to figure out when to let the pencils shine through and when to to add something to them yourself. It's probably an interesting balance of saying, I gotta make sure that how I'm coloring this allows for what, Gene originally did and the inkers originally did. Because Dan Davis did some ink work on some of this as well, didn't he? If I remember correctly.
Inking. There's some inking here by,
Andrew Pepoy.
Andrew Pepoy, thank you.
Pepoy.
Yes. Yeah. He did at least a few pages here.
Is that? I guess I do have a question about that. Is that different for you when you get the color work? Or is it pretty much so dealing with the same issues you normally deal with? When there's a different inker?
It's not much different in terms of how I do my work. I mean, Gene's work comes through regardless. It's different. I mean, it certainly looks different than when Gene is inking his own stuff, which he does in most of this issue, I think. But it's not that big a deal. If you have a good colorist, and Andrew's, he's got a lot of experience, and Gene's worked with him before as somebody that Gene likes working with. So,
does a penciler usually get the opportunity, especially with Gene's caliber, because he got to work with Dan Davis in the last issue, and then...
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Does he have a say on who the inkers are, or is that something where he works on that with the editor? How does that normally work?
I can't completely speak to that, except again that Gene has worked with Andrew before and likes how Andrew inks his stuff. I don't know what happened with Dan Davis. I don't know if that was a choice on Gene's part or something that the editors had to decide. But Gene does have some clout, and so I'm sure that he has more pull. Or even if I would imagine, if the editor is the one who decides that we need a second inker, I'm sure that they would ask Gene or ask if this guy's okay. I mean, I can't say I'm sure, but I'm sure that there's an exchange there. If Gene wasn't happy with it, I'm sure he would let someone know. I can't speak.
I mean, just as a reader, it worked really well. I mean, I think everybody who worked on this, it felt like there was never a part of it where I felt like, wow, that looks different or things like that. And I think that's the consistency. And I think it goes back to, you've got the same penciler working all the way through. You've got the same colorist working all the way through. So when you have maybe some different inking, because those two elements are in place, there's a consistency that's there in, where you're not having that. I think you alluded to this before, when you've got too many people, too many cooks in the kitchen, a lot of times you'll have those jarring moments where you're like, whoa, what just happened there? I never had that throughout this. This was, to me, these were two issues that really stood out, and it's why I wanted to talk about them, because I felt like for our listeners, this might be a book that, people who are fans of Batman and Superman, who listen to our show a lot, may have missed this, because it's Phantom Stranger. He's a little bit of a smaller character in the DC universe, but these were issues that really they work really well together, and visually they were a treat, and the story was phenomenal. It had everything that I wanted, and I had a lot of passion for these issues, which I do with your work all the time anyway. But it's always interesting to me when you guys get a chance to do something that's a little just wacky and out there, because I think it does take me back to the Wildstorm work that I enjoyed so much.
Well, cool. Thanks. That's great. That's very nice of you to say.
Come on, Skreel. Let's pay these Plutonian beam makers a visit.
Want to remind everyone about a show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434 or Dr. Norge on Skype. We actually have some voicemails that have been saved up that go along with the Man of Steel that are going to be airing on our next episode. And then any other voicemails also that I have will also air on that. We'll do a voicemail catch-up that'll be a part of that episode as well. So please continue to call into the show. We love having you a part of it. We have a show website over at ragingbullets.com where it's constantly updated with show news. It links into our Twitter account. We also have a Facebook account, a Google Plus account. You can also find our amazing, very, very cool Raging Bullets Facebook group that I encourage you to join if you're not already a part of it. It's a great community of people there. I mentioned last episode that we are working on a YouTube channel for Google Hangouts that have been held. And that's something I've been working on the side. I'm trying to keep the main show going, and it's kind of like a side project that we've put together. Jeremy has been very helpful with that, and all of the people that have been involved in those Google Hangouts. It's almost done. I'm in the process of working on getting those episodes up. Actually, over the next couple of days after this episode is released, that's going to be my next project, to be sneaking that in and getting that finished. Jeremy and I have been doing a lot of talking on how to get those up there quickly, and I think we've got something in place now that'll make this go a lot faster from now on. So that is coming. The channel's already been made. It's just getting the content up there, so that's some bonus content that'll be up on the show. Once again, sponsoring this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, remember to check out that Villain Bundle. This is a great chance to get all 53 of those titles at 50% off for $105.73. It's an amazing discount from the original price of $211.47. Over at InStockTrades.com, don't forget to pick up Absolute Top 10, the hardcover. Amazing, highly recommended work. It's a $54.99 hardcover. That's 45% off the original $99.99 price. Remember, orders of $50 or more give you free shipping, so you can get that book shipped for free, too, which is really cool if you're on a budget. So if you haven't checked out an Absolute Edition, I can't recommend this one enough because of the great art team associated with it. And I want to thank Art Lyon for joining us on the show. We will see everyone in our next episode for Man of Steel.
Bye.
Flying through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Faded for love and flaws and incredibly clear sightlines. Swinging your mace around, such a practical outlook. Helping the JSA and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman, your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman. The villains are closing in, be they Thanin Guard or Egyptian, working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up. Things would be so much easier if you would just call for backup. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman, your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman, talking about Hawkman.